I've heard sometimes that recovery is creating a life where there's nothing for drugs or alcohol to fix.
Nothing to escape from.
Nothing to escape from, right?
Yeah.
I don't want to be anywhere else than where I am right now. I don't want to be anybody else than I am right now. And that is such a far cry from the person that I was 20 years ago when I was using drugs and alcohol to escape my situation and mainly to escape myself because my actions over a period of years, it really just, I hated the person I had become. I really did. And I didn't know that there was a way out. And again, that's the power of recovery. It is a spiritual solution to a spiritual malady. I was trying to fix a spiritual malady in the material world by using drugs, alcohol, food, you name it, books I used to escape. When I was a child, I didn't know that's what I was doing. I always thought I was just a reader and I like books. But before I knew about drugs or alcohol, I was using this as, a child to escape where I was because I wasn't comfortable being me. And, you go to the library and boom, you got your escape there. So I actually blame libraries for my drug and alcohol problems. So defund the libraries.
Yeah, we
libraries
should ban
are bad.
libraries.
Exactly.
Yeah. That resonates with me a lot. My mom reconnected with a friend of hers that she hasn't seen since 1994 for 30 years, and that friend asked her about me and stuff. And she said, she asked her, does he still make that sound? And my mom said, what do you mean? She said, don't you remember when, basically when I was a kid, I was always, reading those comic books like Tintin, for example. Her son had he was my best friend at the time. His name is Dimitri. He had the whole collection of the Tintin comics,
Dima, yeah.
And I was always reading like that. And she would ask me a question. And I would be like, Basically, I was completely shutting everything off. And I use relationships for that. I really did, man. The dreamed love story for me, that was an intense obsession, very short-lived. I would burn the candle from both ends, and then
Be surprised when the lights went out.
Yeah, and then the real person is here in front of me, and she's wondering what's going on because that's not literally it's gone now.
Right, because you weren't in love with the person, you were in love with the concept of being in love. So it didn't matter who the person was. You were after this feeling. Yeah, it's a thing, man. It's living in the real world is hard. It's not for everyone. That's why drug companies and liquor companies and Facebook and Netflix and all these companies are so successful because they give us an opportunity and an easy way to escape who we are and where we are. And, are we really living? We're alive, but are we living?